There we go. All right, so we'll make a start. I guess I want to do a little bit of a check-in, and maybe you can pop this into your side boxes. What's the kind of mood that you're sensing at the moment? If you pop that into the chat box there, that'd be great. What are you seeing? What are you anticipating with people?
Very mixed.
There we go. Yep, bit flat, insecurity, stretched, job security, some anxiety, others more resilient. Lots of busy, that's probably good. I think particularly higher ed, we've got quite a lot of people here from Monash. There's a great concern about job security, numbness, persistence and creativity, exhaustion and uncertainty. That's an interesting mix to have there. And what you might also be noting is this kind of resignation. Yeah, that's sort of part of the word that I'm looking for. This kind of greyness that's settled in. This is going to go on for a long time. It's never ending. It's very difficult. And it's this weight. That's what I'm sensing when I go around. Now, what you've just done as far as talking about what you feel is going to be an important part of resilience, going to come back to that in a minute. Excuse me, I've just got to still let people in, so I keep looking off to the side. So before I start, I want to talk a little bit about this person who so you've got a picture of a helicopter there. I want to talk a little bit about Rhonda Cornum and resilience. So what does she have to do with it? She was in the first Gulf War. She was a flight surgeon and a major. One day they're going out in a Black Hawk helicopter and they're looking for a downed pilot. On the way out, they get shot down themselves. And of the 8 people on board, 5 die straight away and 3 survive. Let me read a bit about of her own experience then. She says, so I got shot down. The next thing I know, some Iraqi soldiers dislocating the shoulder in my already broken arm. I thought, well, at least I'm alive. And as I was coming down to crash, I thought we could either be dead or captured, and being alive was better. And I could wriggle the fingers in my hands, and that was good because I knew we were really good at orthopedics. Then this guy put a gun to my head, and I thought, things are not going too well, are they? So I started racking my brains, thinking about all of the really good things I had in my life. I'd had a good partner, a good son, and at least it'd be a quick end, unlike a lot of people. So my question to you is, do you think Rhonda Cornum is resilient? And if you do, what makes her resilient? Happy to throw in questions or comments out loud because there's not that many of us. I'll pop them into the text box. Is Rhonda Cornum resilient? I've just got a bit of background coming through from someone, so I might get you to mute that if you could. Thank you. Philosophical rather than resilient. Quick processing and adaptation. Yep. So I say yes. She's looking for the positives in any situation. Yep, that's all true. Any others? Is she resilient? What? Yes, aware of what she can control and can't. So what John's referring to is the circle of influence and circle of control. And resilient people focus on what they can change and not what they can't. Resilience is measured over time. Thank you, Tom. Any others? The thoughts of positive spin and grateful. Yep, adaptable. So one of the things I like most about Rhonda Cornum in that example, and we're not all going to be Rhonda Cornums, is that she's taking charge of how she should feel. So rather than saying the circumstances will dictate how I feel, she's thinking to herself, how can I feel differently? And I'm going to feel differently by thinking about what's been good in my past and what's good about the situation. So the actual exercise she did is probably the thing she chose to focus is not important, but more that her mentality is that I can change how I can feel. And that's one of the really important things about resilient people. So what I want to give you today in these sessions is 3 strategies for changing how you can feel, but also how your staff feel. And a couple important things. I'm going to give some strategies for you yourself to use, but also some to use for your team. Next slide here. So we can move along to the next slide, is a little bit around how people might be going over time. So if you look at the blue arrow, normal level of functioning, we have an adverse event, the first shock, perhaps it was the first lockdown or the advent of the virus. Second shock, and what you notice is that the less resilient people will get hit by the first shock. They'll start to dive, and they can never really. Second shock comes along and completely knocks them off. And often you notice that in when people have had a traumatic, like an accident at work, and they're off on work care for a long period of time, and it's very hard to come back, or PTSD. Most people, though, do something like that. They'll have a shock, they'll kind of recover, second shock, but eventually they'll get back. And I call those the survivors rather than the divers. So they get by. There is a big problem with that level of functioning, which is essentially that the next time the same adversity happens, you want to make sure you recover better. And there's not a lot that happens there in that regard. And other people come back like this, and they're what I call the thrivers. So they become better at facing adversity. So they've learnt about the thing themselves, and they become much better at it. And my rough estimate, and there's not all that much science for this, is that that's about 15%. Most people are here, and most people are right at the very, very top. Question for you, again, in the text box: where are you and your teams at the moment? Diving, surviving, or thriving? Anywhere along those curves? Surviving, yep. Yep, surviving. Great. Somewhere to survive. That's fantastic. Surviving, depending on the issue of the day, closer to surviving, the majority survive. Great. Now, if I had more time, I would take you through a little bit more detail around that. And the difference between the levels is that right down the bottom, what people need is tools for coping, which is therapy and those sort of second or third level interventions. Surviving's around learning tools for focusing and performing. But right at the top, it's about learning. The people that are the most resilient, and I'm going to say this, you're going to challenge it probably at some stage, actually end up seeking adversity or seeking challenges, and they learn about learning. So they become not just good at learning around the external situation. In this case, we've got a virus. How do we do that? How do we go and do it in normal jobs? But learning about how they are in the case of the virus. What are we resorting to? So look, this is not an uncommon story. I'll talk about mine. First shock comes along, and I was turning to lots of things. Red wine was one of them. A little bit of denial, a little bit of lockdown, hope it will go away. And the wonderful thing about the lockdown, there's a lot of bad things about it, it's a great chance to look inside and see what you're made of and see what your values are. And after a while, I stopped that and I started sort of focusing outwards again. But the difference between those two levels is not just dealing with what's going on around you, but thinking about how you respond and using that as an opportunity to learn more about yourself. And that'll also happen with your teams. So as I said, today's program is built on 3 different programs I've got. One's around happy workplaces, one's on resilience, and the new one about leading remotely. And there's a lot of leaders on this program, and you might be recognised that some of the challenges of leading remotely is you can't see what people are doing, and they tend to go off on tangents, and you don't have those little minute course corrections. So strategies I'm going to talk about there are all from those 3 programs. So let's start on them. The first one's managing your mood. I'll talk about sort of, it's not actually 3 strategies, it's probably about 8 or 9. 3 for that: accounting corrosiveness that you might hear coming up in the workplace, and the last is about getting people to face forward. I'll start with managing the mood though. So I've talked about that little curve, and the first thing around the little curve is that you need to validate how people feel. I'm just going to skip through a couple of slides here. Come back to it. You need to validate how people feel. So people find it very difficult to move on from emotion if it's not validated, and validating is a kind of tricky thing. And the reason, we'll come back to this guy later, is Ernest Shackleton. The reason that you need to manage people's mood is that there's this thing called mood contagion, and you can see that slide there. I've got it from a Chinese researcher that was looking at the spread of mood. And so what you find is that people catch moods just as they catch a virus. You can see in the first picture there, you've got sort of one blue face and one happy face, and the blue infects the next blue, the happy becomes less happy, and it spreads around. And we know that mood contagions happens, and it particularly happens when you have leaders with a particular mood, and your followers are much more likely to catch that. That guy on the last slide there is a guy called Ernest Shackleton, and you might have heard about this. He was trying to cross the South Pole. He had a ship called the Endurance. They got down to the South Pole at the turn of the century, and their ship got caught in pack ice and completely picked up. And in that photo on the right, you see it got completely crushed. He eventually got all of his team out in 18 months. Nobody died. But one of the things he was really careful about doing was managing the mood and the messages. And he did that in a whole pile of ways. He kept people working. He kept people hoping. At one stage, as you can see that photo on the right, the ship got completely crushed by the ice, because until then they'd hoped that they could free and they could sail out. And he set them off on this journey across these ice floes. And so they went on these ice floes and they were looking for hard land. And then one day they woke up and a tent had opened up between their crack and the floe was melting. And then they got some boats and they sailed on. So I think Ernest's situation is probably more like we're in at the moment, because Rhonda Cornum had an instant and they had 18 months of it. But one thing he was very careful to do is managing the moods. And he did that in a pile of ways, some that you won't be able to do. But one was around who he let work together. And another one was his constant forward focus and optimism. So important to manage your mood. So in managing your mood, the first thing you need to do is validate people's feelings. So what does that mean? That means that when someone talks about how they feel, you respond and recognize it, but you don't argue with it. And that's something that we often tend to struggle with. I was talking with a researcher at Melbourne University recently about people who feel suicidal and why it escalates. And one of the reasons it often escalates is they'll come along and I'll say, oh, I'm so bad. It's that bad that I feel suicidal. And someone else says, no, it's not that bad really, or you'll be okay. And they go, no, it is that bad. And they go, no, it's not, you'll be all right. And so they then want to prove they feel so bad, and that's when you get those calls for help. So it's important for you to validate the feelings. And the trick in validating the feelings is the more nuanced it is, the better it is. So what I mean by that is, we're going to come back to the others, validating the feelings. This is some work by a woman called Susan David, and she is at HBR, and she talks about, this is just one example. So when someone says they're anxious, what part of anxious do they feel? Do they feel afraid, confused, stressed, vulnerable? What we tend to say is, how are you, good or bad? It's actually not enough to help discharge the feeling. The more clearly you can name it, the more you can label it, the more you can get rid of it. So say name it to tame it. Some research on the left-hand side, Todd Kashdan, he's a researcher over in the States, considered sort of a bit of a maverick, but he did some great research with kids that were problem drinkers. And they gave them 3 interventions. One intervention was social skills. Then there was a control group that didn't get anything. And the other one was they had to describe their feelings. They had to describe their feelings, and it had to be as nuanced. They then measured the degree of their problem drinking. So probably going to guess the answer. Which group had the most success in reducing their drinking? The group that were able to name their feelings really well, the ones that learnt better social skills, or the control group? Just humour me and pop something into the text box, please. Which was the most effective at controlling the problem drinking? People were taught how to, people that can name it, and the more nuanced the naming of it was. So, question for you all, and it seems to be something about the more you can feel the feeling, the quicker it passes through, and the more you deny it. By the way, a definition of problem drinking is when you use it to feel better rather than enjoying the drink. So that's my definition. Important to watch out for in this scenario. I know that when I get bad news, I like to reach for a whiskey. So I've stashed the whiskey at my girlfriend's house in her shed. So I've got to drive 20 minutes. By then I've calmed down. So that's mine. So again, in the text box, I'm not going to ask you to talk about your own. Can you give it sort of a nuanced feeling of a nuanced description of what your staff might be feeling? As nuanced as you can. I talked about sort of grey before, but for me, it's a little bit about this unending sort of weight and this closeness of the business and a little bit of a leaden feeling in my heart. So what are your staff? What do you think some of your staff are feeling? And as descriptive as you can be about that. This is some thinking music while you do that. Vulnerable. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Vulnerable is, thanks, Janelle. That's more descriptive than bad or not that good. Insecure. Yep. Insecure. Worried. Yep. Lacking control. Frustrated. Yep. Can't control my. It's the unknown and not being able to control what's happening. Yep. Flat and a bit overwhelmed and lonely. Yeah. Isolated. Yeah. So there's two reasons you want to get good at that. As leaders, your mood's going to get caught by people, and suppressing them is hard work, but exposing them can make them feel vulnerable and spread the mood contagion as well. So one is to identify it yourself. Now, you don't actually have to tell anyone. I find it useful to do. But my advice on telling someone is, if you're not going to get a good response, if they're going to try and talk you out of it, sometimes you're better off not telling them. You can journal it. You can just feel it. And so that means that when you approach your staff, you're in a better mood yourself. And then when they talk about their feelings, you can validate this. So two reasons. One is to manage it yourself so that you don't spread the bad mood, and one is for them. So that's all I want to say about that. You can spend a whole several hours drilling in on that. And the thing for leaders as well is you don't want to get stuck in, there are some people that you don't want to, you kind of want to validate it, but not get stuck in it. So it's not like kind of staying in a place. What people do is they ruminate and they keep thinking about the thing, and that rebuilds the feeling. So the feeling passes quickly, but we keep going back and visiting the event. Oh, the time such and such did that, or how terrible it is to be in lockdown. You keep going like that, and it brings the feeling back up. So feeling it fully helps you get rid of it, helps you deal with it, discharge it's the word I'm looking for. But you want to also get people out of the thinking. So the rest of these strategies around that. Any questions or comments on what I've talked about? I'm going to keep an eye on the time. If not, I'll keep going. All right. So the second part I talked about there was reassuring people. So what your followers want, I'm not going to talk about this for long, is they want trust, they want stability, they want compassion, and they want a bit of hope. We've kind of led to that. The best example of that is a manager I had at Melbourne Business School. John Trevelyan was his name. I say his name because he was such a great manager. And during the GFC, that's what it was. That's 3 crises ago. They don't stop coming, do they? He would go to we worked at Mount Eliza, which is down the harbour in Melbourne. It's about an hour from the city. He would go to these meetings at the head office, and he'd come back, and as soon as he came back, he'd straight away tell us what had happened. And he'd say things like, I don't think we're in any danger. There's enough money in the fund. I think they'll cut this. They'll do that. And he'd call a meeting, even if it was just in like the printing room. We used to print a lot of the leaders, the booklets and things there. So he'd call this meeting. He'd tell us straight away. And his manner was always very matter of fact. And if it was something he didn't know, he'd say, I'll go and find out about it. So it got to the stage where when John called a meeting, he didn't want to go because he just thought, oh, there's nothing to worry about. It's going to be okay anyway. So he was really able to build that up by being very open and didn't leave a lot of time between the event and when he told us about it. One little caveat there, I was reading some research about being open and with your followers is they like it when you're vulnerable, but don't be vulnerable about your core skills. So don't be vulnerable about not being able to lead them well. So be vulnerable about not cooking well or stubbing your toe or some other stuff. So you want to reveal those sort of things, but you don't want to reveal things for which your followers are following you. So I shouldn't reveal vulnerabilities about running workshops, but you know, it's all right for me to tell you that I'm my mother drives me mad, for example. So that's a little trick with the vulnerability. Sometimes it backfires. People are looking for the leaders to be strong. All right, so we've covered 3 things there in this first section. We've talked about validating feelings, reassuring them, and the last one is joy bubbles or strengths. So how do you get people how do you manage people's moods so they stay positive? You do this thing. You focus on what's going well a little bit, or you talk about that, and you look to strengths. And we know that strengths are a wonderful way of building people's morale and their mood. So I'm going to do a little exercise now. I'm going to try and put you all into rooms. Let me have a look about that. And excuse me a minute. I'll come back to that one. What I'd like you to do is jot down a little moment recently. If you're with someone else, you can do that, where you've demonstrated a strength or a joy that you're looking forward to. Now, strength is something that you're both good at, and something that that you're good at and you like doing. So there's lots of things we like doing. There's lots of things we can like doing that we're not good at, and there's lots of things we're good at, particularly in workplaces, that we don't like doing, that don't energize. So if you just take a moment to do that, and I will. Thanks for letting me know, Tom. So I'm going to put you into book breakout rooms of around 2 or 3. And what I'd like you to share with is something you're really looking for that's going to give you joy, or some strength that you're going to get to show in the next couple of weeks. And you've got about 2 or 3 minutes, so it's about a minute each. Okay, off we go. Here we go. So you should be getting asked to join those rooms. Hello, I think we're back. Great. I think we've got everyone back. How was it?
Good. Good. It's nice.
How's your mood feel afterwards?
Oh, good. It's good talking about something uplifting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So we've got a natural propensity to focus on what goes wrong, and it's really, but the difference between us and beings that aren't conscious is you can control where you put your attention, and one of the powerful ways to do that. And there's actually, they find that bad is stronger than good, so they talk about valence, and that means that a bad event of the same kind of charge has 3 times the valence of a good event. So you have 3 good things happening, 1 bad thing happens, it wipes out all the good ones. So you need to be quite deliberate about where you put your attention. It's not about denying what's going wrong. It's just recognizing we're drawn to bad news, because that's how our ancestors survived on the plains. The ones that kind of went, oh, there's no problem with that saber-toothed tiger, got eaten. The ones that panicked and ran really fast survived. So you got those genes. That's okay. That's just how it is. And it's useful. It's useful in stressful or dangerous situations to respond really well. But most of the time, they're not life-threatening. But we still got that sort of wiring. So that's a little bit about changing it. So you can imagine talking again to your staff that you might change some of the questions you ask. You might be a little bit about What was the strength you got to use today? Or how did you look after yourself today? Or I have got a list, if I remember, I'll send it around, which suggested about 20 questions to ask during lockdown instead of how are you? My flatmates came back from London and has been out of work for a year, and he's, you don't want to ask Greg how he is because you're going to get an earful, but I can ask him how his plant garden's going and a bunch of other things. All right, is that okay? Because I should keep moving just in the interests of time. Yep, I'll assume that's a yes. Can you still see my screen? No.
No.
There we go. All right. So we're about just over the halfway mark. I'm not going to talk about this. This is just stuff, sort of pre-COVID, really. I'm talking, I said I wasn't, that if you talk about strengths and performance reviews, you get a 36% improvement. If you talk about weaknesses, you get a decline. But we don't have time to go into that. So let's leave that for another program and keep moving. That came out of CCL in the US. All right, countering the corrosiveness. This is one of my favorite ones. So countering corrosive, you've got to stop, you've got to address or challenge the narrative in the workplace about how terrible everything is. And things aren't great, but it's important to challenge that narrative. And one of the ways is by getting people to focus to become more optimistic. Funny picture there. But as I just said, our natural propensity is to focus on what goes wrong. And you've got to work against that. So, and it's good for a whole lot of things. This is some out of some work done by Martin Seligman over in the US. I think it was in the, published his book in the 90s. And he looked at the performance of optimists. And what he did is he did some research on sales staff. And they tested them on aptitude and optimism. And so they found the whole lot of the staff that had a high aptitude for sales, and they measured their optimism and pessimism, and they found the ones with the most optimism did the best well with the sales. And then they got a group that had no aptitude for sales, that still applied for the sales job, and measured their optimism, and they were the highest in the optimism, and they outperformed the others. So let me repeat that. Even though one group had aptitude for optimism, they didn't do as well as the other group who didn't have an aptitude but were highly optimistic. And it was a fairly significant difference, about 31, it was about almost 60% of the highly optimistic. Why would that be? Why would optimism serve you so well in a role? Any thoughts? Why would optimism work? Got to get my chat. There we go. Gives you energy. Yep. Any others? Why would optimism be such a powerful predictor of performance? Possibility and commitment. Yep. Yep. More creative. Definitely more creative. Yep. Positive joy. Yep. And look, one of the keys is optimists just keep going. And I was talking to a German entrepreneur recently. He was an athlete. He said, "Oh, what I know is, if you just keep going, you'll eventually succeed because you're just, well, you do have to learn as you go along, and it can be infectious." So that they just kept going, and they made that extra call, and they became more successful. All right, so now you're going to say, "Oh, Chris, how am I going to be optimistic? Oh my God, it's not my natural style to be optimistic." Well, it turns out that we all have something called an explanatory style, and it's how we explain events to ourselves. And there's 3 dimensions to it. So right down the bottom, you see it's a time event. So is something permanent or temporary? Is everything like that, or is it only one isolated piece? And is it you or not about you? So what optimists do when it's a good event, what pessimists do when it's a good event, they say it's temporary, it's isolated, and it's not me. So someone compliments you at work and you go, "Oh, it wasn't really me that did the good work. It was someone else, and it's only one thing, and I won't get complimented ever again." A pessimist, an optimist goes, "Good event, I'm great all the time. I always get lots of compliments, and everything I do is pretty good, and I made it happen." So I know they're both slightly crazy, but stick with me. And then when a bad event happens, it goes the other way. The pessimist says, everything bad, it's always been bad, and it's really bad for me. Think about coronavirus. This is going to go forever. Everything's crap, and it's worse for me than for everyone else. And in fact, everything's not crap. The sun still shines, still in a country that's actually handling it pretty well. We're in a democracy. Our harbour hasn't blown out. You can still go for a walk. The food at home's all right. You still drink Pinot. But an optimist does the opposite. When a bad event, it's only one thing. The virus will pass. I've still got my good friends, and look, everyone's in the same boat. That's one good thing about it. So you can teach people to use that skill in how they explain things. So I'd like you to make a note now of the dimensions. Going to put you into breakout rooms again. So going back over it, pessimists, when something good happens, diminish it by saying it's only one little thing. It had nothing to do with what I did, and it'll pass. And optimists do the opposite. They say everything's good. I helped make it happen, and it's the way things are going to get better from now on. You can see the difference. When you hear people talking in those terms in your workplace, it's always, I think it's important to challenge it and get them to be quite specific about what aspect of it is not good. And also to be generous about what aspect of it is positive. Seligman, in his research, so what he found was that equally point of view is equally optimists and pessimists are equally deluded, but that optimists live longer, had better lives, and earn more money and were more successful. So I guess you've got to choose a little bit between being slightly deluded and the quality of your life. But it's a skill that you can learn. So look, I had a little exercise planned for here, but in the interests of getting through the rest of the material, I'd like to keep going. Is that okay? If not, or give me a thumbs up. Whoops. All right, so let's keep going. And the last one I want to talk about is facing forward. So thinking about those curves again, you've acknowledged how people feel, you've validated their feelings, you've been open with them and reassured them, given them hope. You've talked, maybe changed the conversation up and started to talk about strengths or little moments of joy that they have just by shifting their feelings. Then you've challenged where you hear those terms about always and never, and started to think about your own explanatory style and other people's explanatory style, knowing that they're both a little bit not quite accurate, but one is going to give you better outcomes. And now it's about getting the team to face forward. So how do we do that? I'm going to go back to the resilience model I teach. It's got 6 bits. We're not going to go through all those. We're just going to focus on one today, which is around adversity. And so what resilient people do is whenever something comes up, they try to learn or gain from it. So whenever they face some challenge, they go back afterwards and they get the juice from it. And that's not the same as saying that you want bad things to happen, but it is around saying when they have happened, what can you learn? What can you use this opportunity for? And I talked a little bit about myself earlier and coming into COVID and how it was pretty hard, but it turned into a good opportunity to kind of, I guess, look inside and think about my values and who I wanted to be. Anyway, I don't want to talk about myself too much and come back to this. So, stumbling block or stepping stone, resilient people always go back and learn. And the thing you can start to ask your staff now, it's not good to do this when people are in the early stages of the adversity, when things are in that first step. It's not a good time to start saying, oh, what will you learn from it? Because you're likely to get told where to go. But as people start to recover, you can start to learn from that. So what are you learning? Here's some examples of what some organisations have done as far as learning and adapting. The people who make these sushi soy things have now used them for putting in antiseptic in small doses that you can use on your hands in developing countries. I thought this is an interesting innovation that's come out of COVID. It's a device that not only charges your iPhone, but sanitizes the outside of it. This is an alternative way a university found of doing the graduation. They wanted the students to graduate. They couldn't go to COVID, so got a ski lift and people went up one at a time and you got to cheer them and you got your social distancing. So the question, I like this one as well. This is an Australian intervention. A designer has come up with a way to get be able to have people working together but have less circulation of airs potentially carrying pathogens. So I guess, and it's a judgment call on your part with your team, you can start to ask, what are you learning? What are we getting from this? How do we do this better next time? Remembering that that's not about invalidating how they feel, but about starting to get them to face forward and learn from things. Questions or comments on that? We've got small enough a group that I can take any specific questions. Otherwise, I will move on, sorry. All right, I'll keep going. The last one, yes, so going back to that, what I was saying earlier, the real opportunity is not just learning how to change the world for you, but how do you adapt to the world? Now, if you think about the broader scale of what's going on here, a lot of people are not going to have the retirements they thought they were going to. A lot of people are not going to have the funds they thought they're going to. They're not going to have, we're not going to have a lot of the status that we wanted to have from the great job, and a lot of us are going to be out of work. So you can rail against that, or you can start to think, how do I be okay with myself where I am? And that's a little bit of a harder thing to come to. How do I be okay with how things have turned out, where my relationships are, that all the things I thought I would be or have aren't going to happen? And I've got a couple of questions about redundancy in the pre-questions. Thank you for those people. I can't really answer them in this forum, but we can touch base later. But that's going to be important in reinventing yourself if you are one of those people or managing some people who are going to lose their work, about how they rethink who they are and the value they get from that. All right, last little intervention, getting people facing forward. So I talked earlier about our love of humans' love of the negativity. We're attracted to it. It has a lot more power for us, and it's a safety thing. And our attraction to that, and that bad is stronger than good. If you anyone who's interested, you can actually Google. There's a research paper called "Bad is Stronger Than Good." I think it's by Sonia Lyubomirsky. So, going back to the positive psychology research, here's a question for you. What is the ratio of positive to negative comments in a high performance workplace? In a workplace that performs really well, how many positives are there for each negative? So I'd like you to pop some numbers up, and you can put the positive number first and a colon, and then the negative number into the 5-to-1. Okay, I'm not going to comment, John. Let's keep going. Anyone else? Ratio positive to negative. Ratio positive to negatives, 2-to-1, 60-40, 4-to-1. Yep. 90-10. I want to work with where you're working, Claire. That sounds great. It is in fact 6-to-1. John's pretty close. It's actually 5.8, but it's a bit hard to make 0.8 of a compliment. You sort of say, you're working really, and then you stop the rest of the sentence. So it's 6-to-1. And the positive comments would be either praise, so you did a great job around that, understanding or gratitude. And the negative comments, disapproval, sarcasm and cynicism. And some examples. You handle a client really well. Someone comes in late, the work, they've got a meeting with the CEO, you say, I understand. This second one about understanding, that's the validating the feeling. Now, what most of us do to that person who's late for the meeting, say, oh, I would have left early if I was you. Or why don't you take Warrigal Road instead next time? Or something like that, and then gratitude. So a very, very simple way to start to raise the morale of your team at this time is to raise that ratio. And people say, Chris, but I don't want to make things up. And I say, absolutely, don't make anything up. Find things. And this is again about shifting your attention. I keep talking about being rational. there's lots of things we can't control, but one thing you can control is what you give your attention to. So shift your attention onto what's working and call it out. It's not about being polyamorous. Make sure polyamorous. It's not being what's that word? Pollyanna. Pollyanna. It's not being Pollyanna. It's around noticing what's working and what's positive. Now, a lot of these strategies I'm giving you actually are things you would use in workplaces without COVID around. They're just good practices to have. So how are we going for time? 10:16, we're going well. So I wanted to come back and talk a bit about things in general. So I've talked in this last section about, let's summon to the room, around facing forward. I gave you two practices there. One was around, raising your ratio, and the other one was looking to what you can learn. And the proviso again is to be a little bit careful that you don't want to say that to someone who's in a lot of angst, because it can sound that you're unsympathetic. Okay, so that's most of the workshop. We'll throw open some questions in a moment. A couple of things I just want to cover off. That's the whole of the resilience model. I do teach that. It's about 6 sessions of an hour and a half each, a week each time. You can do a whole day on that. And then there's one session for questions and answers. This is one group I ran it with, and it's an analysis of the workshop. And the number I wanted to draw you to was the average improvement in resolving an issue, 107%. So it kind of doubled. After the workshop, by applying the principles of them, they felt twice as capable of dealing with it. They got an average of 3 to 20 insights, an average of 9 from the workshop. And I make them very practical and pragmatic. I get them to actually focus in and apply the compass to what's going on for them at the moment. So it is learnable. I'm going to come back to what happened to Rhonda Cornum and talk about that. And here's the sale part. You'll like this. I'm going to pitch something at you, but I think you'll like it. I'm offering a strategy session. It's a one-on-one where we get to talk about how your team are going and how to manage them. And that would do a morale check. I think I've misspelt that. Do a bit of a performance analysis. Look at situational leadership. So which staff can be let run, which need a little bit more guidance. How often you should be talking to them and what the mediums should be. This is all around how to lead them better. Part of the issue with leading people remotely is it's hard to do, and the suggestion I've come up with is that you actually teach them to manage themselves, and so that you don't need to manage them as well. The checklist for doing that, I'm going to customize it, and there you go. I think I've got the price up. It's free if you book me in the next couple of days, I think I said. So we'd get on the phone, we would talk through your scenario. I'll give you 45 minutes. I'm going to send the link out after this. That's the offer after this. So I think that's a pretty good offer myself, although we say people don't value things I don't pay for, but let's see how it happens. So I'll send the link around. If anyone wants that, happy to do that. I'm going to pass on, I've been working with quite a few teams at this time, pass on what I know. And it's a chance for me to get some feedback and keep it real as well. And there were a lot of questions that came through that I couldn't answer, unfortunately, because there's not enough time. I want to come back to Rhonda Cornum right at the start. So I got up to, she says, and then this guy put a gun to my head, and I thought this is not going too well anyway. And then she says, and then the gun went click, and I thought, well, that's not too bad after all. So she survives, and she now teaches resilience skills. And what she says, and I quote, is that these skills are learnable. You can learn to be more resilient. And what I'd urge you to do is, rather than just deal with the current circumstances and get better at those, use this opportunity to build your capacity for resilience so that whatever comes up, you're better at it. It's like a fitness thing. Don't just get good at the crisis of COVID and lockdown, but there'll be something else after this. You know, once the coronavirus is over, we've got global warming and wealth inequality and any other number of things. How can you get better at bouncing back from whatever happens? just to summarize, I've got some questions. In this session, I talked about managing people's moods, and that was a bunch of things, including validating what they feel. It was around managing your own mood, counting the corrosiveness when you start to hear always and never, and getting them to look forward. And the two strategies I talked there were around a 5-to-1 ratio, and also what can you learn. I think we're doing great for time. Looking at my clock, 10:21. We've got a few minutes for questions. I'm going to turn off the screen because it's stopped sharing, and throw it open. Throw open your mic, chuck them in the text box of how people are making use of this environment to thrive. How do you manage someone who's very often negative in meetings? All right. Yep. They're both good questions. So the tricky ones. The thing, when you're responding to the people who are negative in meetings, you want to validate them, as I talked about before, but not actually give them too much airtime. My experience of those people is that if you can say things like, what I'm hearing you say is da 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 and da da. Have I understood you? Is that right? Am I hearing you right? If you can repeat back to them what they've said or what they're feeling, they will often let it go and then move on. So that's one way to do it. A more structured way to do that is to use something like Edward de Bono's 6 hats, where you set a specific time. Let's say you're considering some proposal and this person is always negative about whatever you're talking about. You make that a group activity. So you say, as a group, we're now going to consider everything that's wrong with this proposal. Then you're going to consider everything that's right with it. Then you consider everything that's interesting about it. And de Bono's got the six hats. The black hat is for negativity. So you take that away from the person and you manage it by making a specific time where everyone does that in the room. So that's 2 suggestions. I sometimes find as well with someone who's consistently negative, I like to work with a flip chart and a whiteboard. Once you start to write them up in the parking board, it's like it's gotten acknowledged and they can now let go of it and move on. Often behind that person is a little bit of anxiety, and if they can feel heard, then they'll be better for it. Now, examples of people who have making use of this neuro environment to thrive. I can think of a couple. One is my neighbour, who is a winemaker and has flipped his business around to make hand sanitizer. There's a set design company in Melbourne that now make PPE. And there's some of the other examples I gave you before. I'm not sure if I'm actually answering your question, Ren Malee. I also know of a good friend of mine who has been, did I answer? Just give us a thumbs up if I did. Got. On a personal note, a friend of mine, big drinker for many years, has just stopped altogether and is now taking walks and enjoying it. So I guess it's a few examples there. Other questions or comments? All right, well, I've got one for you. If no one's got one there. I'd like you to switch on your mic and join a call out. I'd like to hear sort of the best takeaway or the thing that you most want to use after this. So in any order, please.
Chris, I'll start just to be eager and just say thanks for answering my question. Actually, there's a few useful things for me to start to implement with that particular individual, or in any situation where there's some negativity, to call it out.
Yep, you probably, depending on how close you are, you might want to deal with it by structuring the meeting that way. If you look up de Bono's 6 hats, you know, I can come and teach it to you, but you can just read the hats and pick it up in 5 minutes. Something like that will help us. And you also got to force them in that time. Now we've heard your idea, Jeff, about what's wrong. Now we only want to hear what you like about it, and kind of force us to think the other way. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Others?
I think just that reminder that it is really important to validate someone's feelings. Even if they are struggling and there is negativity, you've got to acknowledge it for them.
Yeah.
and that can help them move forward. The automatic thing otherwise is to, oh, no, you should be feeling better about it. You should be feeling better. But you're right, you've actually got to validate how they're feeling is actually, it's true to them. So acknowledge it, validate, and help them move on.
Yeah. You know, the trouble is you're busy, you're working, got things to do. Now you've got to stop and acknowledge this person's feelings. So I think it's actually sometimes to recognize you can't do it because you're in a state of stress yourself and, you know, cut yourself some slack. But yeah, others.
I think Garrett. Sorry.
Yeah, please.
I'll go then. All right, Janelle speaking. I really liked breaking down the aspects of the reassurance. I've been thinking that people need reassurance, but actually capturing what those exactly is. And I think that that's really great thinking about it in terms of that trust, stability, compassion, and hope.
Yep. There's a paper around it somewhere. I'll see if I can dig it out. But thank you. Others?
I'll repeat what Janelle just said, actually, ironically, that one. But the other take home for me was that the Susan David, that idea of getting the nuance more in the global language that's getting used a lot at the moment in the COVID environment. And not actually getting that nuance of, well, what exactly is it for you? You know, because it's, there's a lot of fudging going on. So I thought that was really helpful. Thank you. Thanks for the input. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I think for me, the takeaway is about challenging the narrative of negativity. I have a member of my leadership team who is always all doom and gloom whenever we meet, which you can deal with in a small group. But then when we go into my whole staff meeting, this is the way she always starts, was about how terrible everything is. And I've been wondering whether I say something to her about it and say, I don't actually want that kind of communicated in my staff meeting at all, because that's where I think it kind of brings people down, where I'm wanting to actually bring people up. So it's given me something to think about how I challenge her on that.
Yeah, especially at the start of a meeting too, because it sets the tone then. Look, if you know, if you can find a way to have that conversation that validates how she is, he or she, that privately that doesn't, they don't lose face, that'd be probably useful. Ranmali, do you need to go? Do you want to say something before you jump off?
Yeah, no, thanks very much, because I think what's already been echoed by the others, I think there's a whole aspect of really dealing with the negativity up front and then moving on. I think that's something that I will take away.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I think just following on from that that positivity, the joy bubbles. The reminder for me is to open up those meetings on a high. So yeah, I like the reminder about the check-in questions. Things that we're looking forward to, the strengths, the successes, celebrations. It sets the tone for your meeting. Yep.
If you say to someone, "Oh, how have you looked after yourself today?" Or what's something surprising? They go like, "Oh, okay," and it's like, "Well, I came in here to be unhappy. Now I've got something good. Oh, all right." You can almost see that happening. Look, I'm as guilty of it as anyone else. Others we haven't heard from. Danielle, have we heard from you?
Yeah, I'd like the facing forward. My guys are real planners, and so now they're going into the cycle of planning for 2021 intake. And so a lot of that's really unpacking process and new ways forward, and maybe regardless of if it's COVID or not COVID, maybe we still go and do, admission interviews by Zoom regardless. So it's really looking at, and because they're trying to get into plan cycle, and it's like they still a bit clutching onto the old way of doing it, and maybe we shift that to, well, this is the new, regardless of COVID or not, let's go towards this new way of doing it.
Yep. There's a guy, John Grinder, who's, you might have heard of NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Program, but he also talked about a downside strategy. Because I happily went to one of his workshops and bragged about how I like taking risks. And he said, but you don't have any downside strategies, things go wrong. So I thought it's kind of a nice frame, this is how we think we're going to go, but if it doesn't go well, here's how we'll deal with it.
Okay.
And then you get that range. So, and they might like that term too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. Carla or Tom, if you want to, don't feel any obligation.
Yes.
Anyone? Hi,
really
Carla.
good, hello, to get insight of how to manage employees' moods as well. And so that was a good key takeaway, and work with other people's strengths.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, just reiterating some of the things that some of the people have already said. I did like the acknowledgement thing. It's something I feel like I get very frustrated about, that I don't get managers acknowledging my concerns. I don't just validating. I'll shut up once they say, yeah, okay, I hear that, but I don't get them saying, I hear that. So I constantly have this recurring conversation or recurring argument sort of going on.
Yeah.
But I just need someone to say, yeah, I got it, but something else is going on or whatever. Yeah.
Tom, do you think it's a really hard skill? I've spent 2 days with HR managers in a workshop getting film with actors, trying to get them to get that. So it's a really hard skill. Is it possible for you to train people around you to hear you?
Look, it's funny you say that, because I never realized all I needed was someone to say, yes, I hear you, until recently. So, and until someone actually did that for me. I actually had a manager and said, look, Tom, you know, I hear you, but look, you know, the deadlines are tomorrow. We've got all these things. The contractors are here. We just can't do this at the moment. So once they said that to me, I shut up, and I could actively play the game again with everybody. I was actively on the field again. But it's funny, because I didn't even realize I needed that until someone gave it to me, and then like I was back in there. So I suppose you're right. I don't know, maybe I should be a little bit more assertive in sort of like, can you just acknowledge this type of
Well, what you might do is you might need to hear them first. You might need to say something like, I know that's really important. We've got these contractors coming. We can't stop from that. But I'd like you to hear that I'm worried about this. That's all I want you to do.
Yeah.
So maybe you, and I had exactly the same example as you, Tom. A manager once said to me, he goes, no, we hear you. We just don't agree with you. But when we don't agree with you, we think you don't hear me. And I'm like, oh, okay, I am being heard, and I don't agree. That's okay.
That's it. That's exactly right. I mean, then, you know, they're in those positions where they can make those decisions, and that's fine. But, you know, but until they actually tell you that that's what they're going to do, it sort of just grates on you.
It does. It's like you're not being heard. Anyway.
Yeah, it's very similar to what you were saying about the nuances and sort of getting the, getting those feelings out in detail. It's quite closely related to that.
Good. Well, thank you all. I will send an email around with the slides and the appointment link if you want to take that up. I'd love to get a chance to work with you. Otherwise, have the best day you can have. I'm not going to say have a great day. Someone was saying yesterday, why do we have to have great days all the time? Sometimes they can just be ordinary days. So I'm wishing you whatever day you can have that works for you. And thanks for attending.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.